Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump loves nothing more than to start a crisis that he could then claim credit for solving. It's a go-to move of his, and today we got the latest example of this on the world stage. Trump spoke to fellow global leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, ranting about how much he wanted to own Greenland, insulting all the European countries who've objected, going into weird tangents of like gutter racism, generally embarrassing himself and all of us once again on the world stage. It's a familiar refrain now, an obsession of his. For months, he's basically been threatening to take Greenland by force the way that Hitler rolled into Czechoslovakia and Putin rolled into Ukraine. Same idea. It has brought the NATO alliance to the brink. It has spooked stock markets. It has even led Canada, yes, Canada, to formulate a military plan for dealing with a U.S. invasion. Then today, having stared the united European opposition in the face, having seen the S&P stock index lose all its gains on the year in one day, having seen poll numbers that show 86 of Americans do not want to go to war over Greenland, Donald Trump started a walk back that ended in a total retreat. It started with one line in his speech that seemed unlike all the others.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Okay. Again, this is Donald Trump speaking, so, should you listen to him? It was, of course, a sentiment belied by everything else he said in his speech and almost everything else his administration has said about Greenland in recent weeks. On Monday, just to cite one example, the Department of Defense was posting AI photos of American soldiers and bombers invading a snowy mountainous land. On Tuesday, when a reporter asked what lengths he would go to acquire Greenland, he said, "You'll find out." And then shortly after that speech today, Trump took to social media to announce full retreat. Quote, "Based upon a very productive meeting that I've had with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. Based upon this understanding, I will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st. Additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome as it pertains to Greenland." I forgot about that part. "Further information will be made available as discussions progress." What does that mean? I don't know. Honestly, I think it's pretty clear Trump doesn't either.
Well, we have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland. And it has to do with the security, great security, strong security, and other things.
That's Trump earlier in an interview with CNBC at Davos. So it's a concept of a framework of a future deal, and it does not sound like Trump is getting Greenland. He's getting talks about Arctic security. In return, he is not waging a trade war on Europe this time and apparently not going to invade Greenland. Now, what?
Joining us, Maryland Congressman and ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin. Congressman, really good to have you. I'm going to get to that in one moment. I want to start, though, with contempt. Hillary and Bill Clinton, it got out of committee. It's going to go to a floor vote. How are you going to vote? Do you believe they should be held in contempt for refusing to testify about Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm planning to vote no for two reasons, and I spent a lot of time on these contempt issues when so many Republicans refused to come before the January 6th Select Committee. And the only two who ended up being referred for contempt and then prosecuted and convicted for contempt were two people, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, who did absolutely nothing to cooperate with the committee. But the case law has been that if people are willing to participate and to engage with the committee, then you go back and forth. It's always an unsatisfying process from the congressional perspective. But if people are basically engaged in good faith, that's not contempt such that you would put someone in jail for it. But even if we were going to lower the standards and say we should start jailing people for contempt, even if they've, submitted statements as the Clintons have done, and even if they're willing to sit down for an interview with note takers, as the Clintons said they would be, I wouldn't start with them. I would start with Pam Bondi, who has failed to release more than 99% of all of the Epstein files that she was subpoenaed to bring before the committee. And that's not only a subpoena now, that's federal law. And so that's where the real action is with
Pam Bondi in contempt is absurd. What I have said is release all the files. That's what we want. Pam Bondi is the one who should be held in contempt to release the files. The Clintons should come and testify. Absolutely, they should testify. And if they don't testify after the files are released, fine, move for contempt then. But to move for contempt now, when we're not holding the people who should release the files in contempt, is total political theater. And it's Comer trying to deflect from a flailing Justice Department administration and just try to blame the Clintons.
Well, I just want to put on the table, as I want to do, that I think it's important for people to understand that the President of the United States, one Donald J. Trump, then a Democrat, spent as much time, if not more time, with Mr. Epstein than Bill Clinton. So if you go on after Clinton, all the more reason, Mr. President, to release the files, because your name all up in there just like Bill Clinton. So you got him on the hook. Why not him?
Where's the subpoena for Trump? I mean, how about if you're going to have Clinton, how about have Trump right next to him?
You know, when Republican members of Congress are asked about that by journalists and folks on the Hill, they often say, I heard Nancy Mace say it today. I believe I was listening to NPR. She's like, oh, well, the president has never been implicated in that way like that. And as someone that has seen the documents and that has some, information that, frankly, we are not privy to, because I know you've spoken to the survivors and whatnot, is that an accurate representation of the president's, how he shows up in the Epstein files?
There are 13,000 mentions of him in the files. He lied to the American people that he had never been on Epstein's plane. All of 2024, he lied about it. Turns out he was on Epstein's plane. There's certainly far more evidence of him in the files than there is of President Clinton in the files. And the fact that Comer is going after someone who was president when I was in college and isn't going after Pam Bondi and isn't going after Donald Trump for answers, I mean, what does he think? That the people are stupid? They're not. They will see through this. And they are seeing through this. And he is losing part of the MAGA base. I mean, he's losing Sean Ryan, a podcast. I was on Sean Ryan's podcast. He said, the only reason I was for Trump is because he was going to release the files. He's not releasing the files.
The Epstein estate. So where does this stand, and do you support holding them in contempt for defying a congressional subpoena?
Yeah, well, let's be clear. We have to be consistent about the way we're treating people we're subpoenaing, right? The DOJ, for instance, has not given us millions of documents. They're breaking the law right now.
Yeah,
we're not talking about contempt with them, right? So, from the very beginning, I supported subpoenaing anyone who has information. Republicans wanted to make this partisan. They wanted to target some Democrats. That's why they're talking about Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. But Bill Clinton was, in some of the files, and so we want to see what he knows and hear what he knows. So I'm going to continue to support having.
As discussions around the newly proposed international initiative continue, a growing number of participants have expressed hesitation about joining at this stage. While many acknowledge the importance of supporting stability, recovery, and long-term peace in regions affected by instability, they remain cautious about committing to a new structure whose purpose and boundaries are not yet clearly defined. This caution reflects a broader concern that ambitious initiatives, if not carefully designed, can introduce uncertainty rather than clarity. One of the primary issues raised is the evolution of the initiative's stated mission. Early descriptions suggested a narrowly focused mechanism intended to support administration and recovery in a specific context. However, the formal framework that followed outlined a far more expansive mandate, positioning the initiative as a global body capable of operating in any area affected or potentially affected by conflict. This expansion has led observers to question whether the initiative's scope is too broad to be effective and whether its objectives can be realistically achieved without overlapping with existing systems. Governance structure has emerged as another central concern. The proposed model concentrates significant authority within a small leadership circle, granting sweeping decision-making and interpretive powers at the highest level. While proponents argue that this structure allows for speed and decisiveness, critics worry that excessive centralization may weaken accountability, reduce transparency, and limit meaningful collective oversight. For many potential participants, balanced governance is seen as essential to maintaining legitimacy and trust. Equally important is the initiative's relationship with established international frameworks. Long-standing institutions already exist to address issues of peace-building, reconstruction, and governance through multilateral cooperation. Some observers fear that introducing a parallel structure without clearly defined integration could fragment efforts, dilute cooperation, or undermine shared norms that have developed over decades. For these stakeholders, strengthening and reforming existing mechanisms is often viewed as preferable to creating entirely new ones. The absence of explicit references to the initiative's originally cited area of focus has further fueled skepticism. Observers note that when a charter omits the very context that initially justified its creation, it raises questions about priorities and long-term intent. This gap between initial framing and formal documentation has led many to call for clearer alignment between stated goals and operational plans. As a result, several potential participants have adopted a wait-and-see approach. Rather than rejecting the initiative outright, they have emphasized the need for further consultation, clarification, and possibly revision of the framework. This cautious stance reflects an understanding that early engagement carries long-term implications, especially when authority, scope, and accountability are still being debated. This situation highlights a recurring pattern in international coordination efforts. Broad visions often attract initial interest, but sustained participation depends on detailed design, transparent governance, and clear compatibility with existing systems. Without these elements, even well-intentioned initiatives may struggle to gain broad support. Ultimately, the debate underscores the importance of trust, clarity, and inclusivity in multilateral efforts. Participants